Hi, welcome to Things in My Head. I'm Jason. How are ya? And we're going to try something a little different today. Today we're going to be making classic mead, also known as honey wine. And here's the stuff we got. Here's all our materials. We've got about 5 pounds of honey there. We've got our spatula for mixing stuff. I'm going to use this lid here to measure out my yeast, which is right there, and this yeast is a vintner's yeast. I'll let you look at the label right there. It's what I like to use. Good stuff. And our jug, gallon of water, funnel, tubing to go with my siphon, which I won't be using any of that today because that comes later after the first fermentation is done. You got to siphon it out to clean out your jug and get all the sediment out. Oranges, pretty much everything I need, sugar, so let's get started. Alright, so first I'm going to start by measuring out my honey, and I got 5 pounds of honey. The recipe that I found calls for 3 pounds, but I found I like it better with 4 pounds of honey. So I've got my scale and it's set to pounds and ounces, so I'm just going to pour it in here. And the reason I am doing it this way is because you've got to mix the honey with water, and it just seems to work better if I mix it in a different container than pour it into my mead jug. Wow, this is a lot. I'm going to stop right there. That's a little over 3 pounds, but I'm going to have a real hard time mixing this. So I've been pretty much shaking this for a couple of minutes because stirring it was doing no good. But I've got it fairly well mixed, at least that part. We can get the rest of it better mixed later. And I'm just going to use my phone. And carefully pour in. Yeah, that got pretty much well mixed up. Now, I got to put about another pound of honey in. And actually, I'm thinking 3 pounds is all I used last time. But that's okay. Yeah, I think that's all I'm going to use. That's almost a pound. Doesn't have to be exact. So keeping in mind that alcohol is created when you mix activated yeast with sugar. The yeast eats the sugar and produces gas, and what's left is alcohol. So since honey is almost pretty much pure sugar, you're basically dealing with a lot of sugar, especially in this recipe. The last time I made it, this recipe came out to be a little over 50 proof for wine, which is 25% alcohol. It was probably a little bit more than that, but my reading wasn't exactly accurate, and I'll explain that later. But I'm going to continue to shake this a little bit more. Alright, as you can see, I've got my roughly 3.5, almost 4 pounds of honey mixed up into some water. It's nice and dark at the moment, and it's going to end up being pretty good. The next step is I'm going to add some orange juice for flavor, and I don't use orange juice, I use navel oranges, and it's pretty simple. You just cut, and if you have a juicer, you can use a juicer. I just bought this juicer. Usually I just squeeze it, but I want to try and get as much juice out of this as I can, so I am going to be using this to soften up the meat. I hopefully am not getting too much pulp in there because I don't want a lot of pulp in there. That just creates more sediment. And you'll be filtering that out later, so it doesn't really matter. I'm just picky that way. And once I get that pretty done, I'm just gonna squeeze as much as I can. There we are. This just gives it some good flavor. You don't really need the oranges, but it gives it a nice little bite and a little extra kick. And the citric acid and natural sugars in there just adds to your alcohol. So keep that in mind, especially for those of you who are, like me, diabetic and shouldn't be drinking this. And as you can see, using a juicer, you can get a whole lot of juice out of these oranges. Could probably get a little more than that out if I wanted to, but I think I'm getting enough juice for good flavor. I use 2 oranges. Some people use an orange and a lemon. Some people just use lemons. It's entirely up to you. I'm making a basic recipe of mead. You can also add different kinds of fruits to your mead to infuse it with different kind of fruit juices. So I made some once that was infused with apple juice, and once again I used real apples. I just sliced them, cooked them, pressed them, poured the juice in. You can do the same thing with strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, any kind of berries that you want to put in there for flavor. You can do it that way too. It's not a big deal. So now that I've got my honey in there, I've got my water in there, the next thing that I'm going to do is measure out my yeast. Now my recipe that I have basically calls for 1 gram of yeast for every gallon that you're making. And this packet holds 5 grams. So I'm going to open my packet. And as you can see, I've got my little scale down here. And all I'm going to do, I am going to set it to grams. There we are. I'm going to set it to grams, and I am going to pour in 1 gram of yeast. Now, this packet also calls, you have to rehydrate before use, and it says 104 degrees to 109 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, what that means is once I've measured out my yeast for use in my mead, once I've measured out 1 gram, wow, well, that's not working very well. I'm sorry. So that's quite a bit of yeast. That's, almost the whole packet. So we're just going to go full bore. Why not? My dad used to say, go big or go home, right? So what we're going to do with that now, I have to set it aside for a moment because it has to be activated. It takes about 10 minutes, I think the packet said. 15 minutes. It has to settle in water between 104 degrees and 109 degrees. You stir it in and it has to set for 15 minutes. And then we can add it to this, top it off with some more water, stir it, cap it, and let it start the first fermentation process. So we're going to pause for a moment while I activate the yeast. While my yeast is fermenting, and you can take a look in here and see, not fermenting, activating, what I've done is I've added the yeast, and I used all 5 grams, even though it calls for 1 gram only. It's got to be activated because if you don't know, yeast is a living organism, and when you buy it in packets, it's dried out, it's dead. Well, not dead, just sort of hibernating. You use warm water to activate it to bring it back to life, and it takes about 15 minutes. So, it is 10:36 right now, so 15 minutes from now, I will add it to my other mixture. Now, I do add more sugar to mine, and that is going to increase my alcohol by volume. And let's talk about alcohol by volume for a minute. To measure alcohol by volume, you use something called a hydrometer. It is basically a bobber, like going fishing. It's got some weights in the bottom to hold it down, an empty tank, and measuring lines. What you're supposed to do is, before you top off your jug to let it start its first fermentation process, you're supposed to drop it in and give it a spin, and when it stops spinning, it floats, just like this, and you read the lines at the water line, and it will give you a number. You write that number down. You save that number, because when it's done fermenting and you open it to start its second fermentation process, you got to measure it again, and that'll give you an idea of what your alcohol content is. There's a mathematical equation that you plug the numbers into to come up with ABV, but Google ABV calculator, input your numbers, it'll work better. Another thing that we have to use is called a vinometer. Now, this is a little bit cheaper. This cost me $2, and it's basically a glass dropper with a few lines in it. What you're supposed to do is, when you're done with the fermentation process, before you bottle it, you just take and pour a little bit into the top up here and let it drip down through the tube and count 6 drops. When 6 drops falls out the bottom, you just take it and flip it upside down and read the numbers that's on the scale. That will give you alcohol percentage. And as you can see, my vinometer only goes up to 25%, which is 50 proof, which is why my last batch I said was at least 50 proof, because I didn't have the hydrometer. All I had was this, and yeah, it just stopped at 50 proof. So it was probably a little stronger than 50 proof. It actually tasted quite good. I'm going to go over a couple of other things too. This is my siphon. When you're done fermenting and you go to bottle it, or at the very least when the first fermentation is done and you're trying to get all the sediment out the bottom, what you have to do is you have to drain this into a different jug. If you try to pour it, that sediment is going to get poured out with it, so you use a siphon and some tubing here. You just, well, that's the wrong size tube, but you're supposed to attach the tubing to the end of it here. This part will go down into your jug, this part will go into your other container, and you just give it a couple of pumps until it starts flowing on its own, and then you leave it to flow. And you pull it out before you get down to the sediment. That will make sure everything stays in here, nothing gets into your alcohol, and you can either start a second fermentation process, or you can go ahead and bottle it if you want to. If you want to bottle it, what I do is I will empty this out, clean out the sediment, and clean out the bottle, and once the bottle is clean, I will put the alcohol back into it and cap it off real tight. Another thing that we use is called an airlock, and I kind of had to fashion an air cap for this one because my cork is too big for my bottle. Your airlock is supposed to go in here, this is supposed to go into the top of the jug, and a little bit of water goes in here. As you can see on here, there's a couple of fill lines. You just put enough water until both of these tanks have water to the fill line, and then you put it on top. Because what happens is, like I told you earlier, the fermentation process creates gas. You need the gas to get out and escape, or it's going to explode your jug. So you need an airlock. What it does is it creates a barrier. The water will let the gas escape out this way, while keeping oxygen out. Because if oxygen hits it, it kills your yeast, kills your fermentation, kills your alcohol, and then what do you got? Watered down honey. Not very good. So we're going to wait a few more minutes until this is done, and then we'll finish off. Now, I'm sure you noticed, if I haven't mentioned it already, this bowl of sugar that's been sitting here. Like I said, I like to add extra sugar for extra sweet, makes it stronger alcohol. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that now and give it a good shake to try and dilute the sugar into the water. Just pour it in with my funnel, and you be careful when you pour it. Especially since the inside of the funnel is already wet, it can make the sugar clog up. But I got that pretty clean. Now, since I don't really have a cap to use at the moment, I'm just going to shake it up. And all you're really trying to do is get the sugar nice and mixed. Get it good and diluted as best you can. Doesn't take much. And give it a few minutes. You see the sugar and the honey has created some bubbles on top of here. That's okay. It's going to bubble up some more. When I add the yeast, you're going to see a little bit of an explosion of bubbles for a quick minute. That's why I haven't completely filled this with water yet. Because the last time I tried this, I had it too full of water. Then I added my yeast, and it made the suds explode out of the top. It clogged up my airlock that I had made, and it accidentally created carbonated mead. But it's just as easy to poison it if the air can't escape. So I got lucky that it got carbonated instead of rancid. Yeah, so don't want to do that. And it's been close enough to 15 minutes. This should be pretty well activated by now. And once the yeast is activated, it's okay to give it a stir to make sure you get everything out of it. It's not going to kill it because it's now thriving. And we're just going to pour this right in. Gives it a good little flush. And you can see the bubbles got a little bit thicker right in the center. We are going to add some more water. Now, those suds, those bubbles are going to get nice and condensed right near the top. So you want to give it a chance to let the bubbles kind of settle down a little bit. Well, see how the bubbles come right out the top? That's what happened to me the last time when I had it too full already. And you can see right here, all this white layer of bubbles is not just the bubbles that was already there, it's already starting to activate. Now, don't put anything else in there because you don't want anything to get into it that might kill the yeast. But as the bubbles settle, you can slowly pour a little more water in. And truthfully, that's about all I'm going to put in it. Now, a little word, like I said, this is too big to fit on here, as you can see, only by a little bit. It is made of rubber, so I imagine if you had a hot knife or something like that, you might be able to shave it down a little bit to make it fit. But since I don't have any of that, I fashioned myself a lid out of basically a twist-off bottle cap and some hot glue. I hot glued the outside, I hot glued the inside so that there's a nice barrier created. There's no air going to leak out of that. And basically that's what I'm going to put on here. It's not a perfectly tight fit, so I'm going to use a little bit of plumber's tape on the outside of this jar. If I can get some off that's fairly straight. All I'm really wanting to do is create a little bit of a better grip for the lid to hold on to. Cricket. There we go. Now that feels like a nice tight fit. That's not coming off. And so the last thing I need to do is very carefully get this top pulled off and fill my airlock to the fill line. But I have to pour very slowly and very carefully because I'm sure this will fill up very quickly. That's an air bubble. There we go. Now it's going to be good enough, I think. Last touch more. Oops. There we go. Now, our little cap on there has holes in the top to let the gas escape through. Now, from this point, we're just going to set it in the closet. We've got a linen closet in the second bathroom that's nice and dark and cool and dry, and that's where you want it. You want to let the yeast sit in a dark, cool place, not too hot, not too cold, but room temperature, and you want to leave it there until it stops bubbling. You will see here the yeast is bubbling, and as the yeast drops further down into the jug, there will be more bubbles created. These suds up here that's in the neck of the bottle, they're going to relax and settle down into the water, and in an hour or so you will see this just bubbling away. And you want to keep an eye on it because it should only take maybe 2-3 days, 4 at most, for it to stop bubbling. And once it stops bubbling, it's ready for the second fermentation. So for now, we're just going to sit it in the closet and wait. And that's it for today. The next thing that I do, I will record another video when I do the second process. Once it's done bubbling and I go to clean it out and bottle it, I'll do another video to show you how I finish it off. And then again, it's wine, so the longer it sits, the better it gets. So you can drink it right away as soon as the first fermentation is done, but it's going to be a little hard. It's going to be a little strong. You want to let it mellow out some. Mead is best when left for a year. To be honest with you, I can't wait a year, so I usually crack it open after about a month or 2, if I can wait that long, because I like it strong. In the meantime, I'm Jason. This is Things in My Head. We'll see you next video.